Clara's fingers ached as she pressed her bloodied hand to her mouth. It wasn't the pain that made her bite back the scream. It was the fear of making him angrier. Frank's rage was something unpredictable, a tempest that tore through everything in its path. And when he was angry, nothing stopped until someone broke. It wasn't the first time he had beaten her, and she doubted it would be the last. After 4 years, she had learned the rhythm of it. The cold silence, the endless waiting, the storm that came without warning. This time, it had been 3 of her fingers. She should have been used to it. But tonight, something felt different. Her hand trembled as she lowered it from her face. The tears she hadn't allowed to fall before now slid down her cheeks in silence. Frank's boots echoed through the house, his steps heavy and slow as he stalked away. His bedroom door slammed, the sound like a crack of thunder. The familiar clink of glass followed. A bottle. Whiskey. He was settling in for a long night. And Clara, well, she was used to the silence after the storm. She wiped her face and breathed deeply. This night wasn't different. It couldn't be. It was just another round of the endless fight she had been losing for years. Or so she thought. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it ever had before, each second hanging heavy like a lead weight. But then, something shifted. A new sound, a new presence, a stranger, a man who didn't belong here. He stood in the doorway of the Silver Dollar Saloon, his gray eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. Clara didn't know who he was, or why he had come, but she felt his gaze like a burning question. It was the kind of gaze that saw too much and yet didn't turn away. Most people saw nothing when they looked at her. They saw the mask of politeness, the face she wore to survive. But this man, he saw her. She wasn't ready for that, not yet. Martha Cole, who had been in and out of Clara's life like the seasons, gave her a knowing look. Clara quickly wiped her face, trying to smooth out the tremor in her hands. She wasn't a stranger to the eyes that saw too much. They made her nervous, made her feel exposed, and this stranger, this man with the gray eyes, was looking at her like she was something more than Frank Sullivan's wife, like she was something worth saving. She shouldn't have believed it. She couldn't. Frank owned half the town, including the law. No one would help her, not even strangers. But something in that man's eyes sparked a forgotten hope. The kind of hope that could get a person killed. As the saloon filled with more customers, Clara busied herself behind the bar, polishing the glasses more for the sake of keeping her hands busy than for any real need. Frank's words echoed in her mind, a constant, nagging reminder that she was nothing more than his possession. But tonight, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this. Something about Jack Thornton, the man with gray eyes, refused to let her go. She had learned to survive the beatings, to survive the shame. She had learned to quiet the voice that told her she was worth something. But she hadn't learned to stop dreaming. Not yet. The night stretched on, and Clara felt the weight of the hours pressing against her chest. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, every motion more deliberate. She didn't know how much longer she could pretend to be a ghost in a room full of people. She didn't know how much longer she could survive, knowing that this man would only get worse. And yet, the longer Jack Thornton stayed, the more she wanted to believe that there could be an end to this nightmare. Martha's words had come at the perfect moment. "Clara Jane, you've been hiding for too long." The words had hit harder than any slap from Frank. And as she turned away to collect herself, she caught a glimpse of Jack's face, watching, waiting, like he was trying to understand her without asking. She tried to shake the thought away, but it stuck, gnawing at the edges of her resolve. By the time the evening ended, the saloon had quieted, the last few patrons stumbling out into the cold night. Frank had disappeared upstairs, leaving Clara to finish her shift alone. But as she wiped down the counter, she couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at her gut. The thought of escaping, of running. She walked to the back room to gather the remnants of her broken self, the face she wore for Frank. She had survived for this long, hadn't she? She had endured. And yet, the soft voice in the back of her mind reminded her that maybe it was time for something different. Maybe it was time to stop pretending that she was okay. Time to stop pretending she wasn't worth saving. "Clara Jane," Martha's voice broke through her thoughts. "You've been hiding for too long. You know that, don't you?" The words hung in the air, but Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. In the silence, she heard Frank's voice from upstairs, distant but still commanding. His power still haunted the walls of the saloon. And yet, for the first time, Clara didn't feel the terror that usually consumed her. Something had shifted. Maybe it was the look in Jack Thornton's eyes. Maybe it was the hope that something could be different, but whatever it was, it burned deep inside her, a spark she wasn't ready to extinguish. And maybe, just maybe, tonight would be the night that changed everything. Clara sat in the small, dimly lit storage room, the door closed behind her. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to steady herself. The cold was beginning to seep into her bones, but it was nothing compared to the chill of knowing that every step she took in this life was watched. Frank's presence loomed over her like a shadow, and no matter how far she tried to move from it, it was always there, just behind her. Her fingers curled around the key Martha had pressed into her hand earlier, the metal smooth and familiar in her palm. It had felt like an ordinary object when Martha had handed it over, but now it felt like the weight of a choice, the choice to run, to break free, to leave everything behind. For the first time in years, Clara let herself imagine it. Freedom. The thought of stepping outside the walls of the saloon, of leaving Frank and the life he had built around her, made her heart race. But even in that small flickering hope there was fear. The fear of the unknown. The fear of what would happen once she was free, if she could be free. The sound of footsteps outside the door made her freeze. She quickly wiped her face, brushing away the tears that threatened to fall. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Not when she had come so close to breaking free. "Clara!" A voice called from the other side of the door, low and familiar. "Frank!" She pressed her ear to the door, waiting for him to leave. He wasn't coming to check on her. He never did. But she had learned long ago that silence was never safe when Frank was around. "Clara," he repeated, his voice sharper this time, filled with that edge that always came when he was angry. She knew better than to answer him. If she did, it would make things worse. She squeezed her eyes shut, the thought of running rising again in her chest. But where would she go? She had no friends, no family in town. No one who could keep her safe. Jack Thornton was a stranger, and even though his eyes had looked at her like she was worth something, even though Martha had spoken of him with quiet hope, Clara didn't know if she could trust him, but she had no other options. The footsteps outside the door grew faint, and Clara exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She let the tension in her shoulders fade, but only slightly. The fear was still there, lingering. It always was. She stood up slowly, her body stiff with years of restraint. Every muscle screamed in protest, but she ignored it, pulling herself together for the task ahead. She couldn't let herself hesitate now. She couldn't let herself think about what might happen if she failed. Martha's words echoed in her mind once more. "You can stop pretending. That would be a start." Clara's hand went to her coat, her father's old coat, hanging forgotten in the back of the storage room. The place she had hidden it from Frank, his pocket watch tucked safely inside the lining. Her father's last gift to her, the only piece of him she had left. Her fingers brushed against the cool leather, and she hesitated. Could she really do this? Could she leave the only life she had ever known and try to start over somewhere else? Somewhere where Frank couldn't find her? Before she could answer herself, the door opened, and Martha stepped inside. Her face was set, her eyes filled with a sadness Clara had never seen before. "You've been standing here long enough, Clara Jane," she said quietly, her voice soft but firm. "You don't need to wait anymore. You don't have to pretend like you're okay." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. "What if it's too late?" she whispered. "What if I can't get away? What if Frank—" Martha. The voice that cut her off was low but steady. Jack Thornton. She hadn't heard him approach, but there he was, standing just inside the door, his gray eyes watching her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice quiet but full of certainty. Clara turned away quickly, not wanting him to see the weakness in her face. He didn't need to see it. He didn't need to know how badly she wanted to believe that someone could save her, that he could save her. "You don't know what it's like," Clara said, her voice trembling despite herself. "You don't know what it's like to be trapped in a life where everything you do is controlled, where every move is watched. Frank has this town, Jack. He owns everyone in it, including the law. I can't escape him. He'll find me. He'll never find you if you let me help," Jack interrupted, stepping closer. There was a calm resolve in his eyes, something that made Clara's heart skip a beat. "I've seen men like Frank. Men who think they can control others with fear and violence, but they always fall. And when they do, it's the people they've hurt who get to decide what happens next. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Clara shook her head. "You don't understand," she said again, her voice growing desperate. "I've tried to leave. Twice. And both times, he found me. He broke me." Jack's gaze softened, and for a moment, there was something in his eyes that made Clara's breath catch. "I understand more than you think," he said quietly, "and I'm not going to let him hurt you anymore. I'm here now, and I won't leave." For a long moment, Clara stood there, unsure of what to say. Her heart raced, her body still trembling with fear and uncertainty. She had heard promises before, from Frank, from the men who had said they cared for her, but this felt different. Jack's words were calm, sincere, and for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to wonder, "What if? What if I can't trust you?" she whispered, barely daring to voice the thought. "Then you don't have to trust me," Jack said, his voice steady. "But I'm not leaving until you're safe, until you're free. You deserve that, Clara. You deserve to live without fear." Clara didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to process the flood of emotions rushing through her. She had spent so long living in fear, pretending that escape wasn't possible, convincing herself that there was no way out. But Jack Thornton had come into her life like a sudden storm, shaking loose the lies she had built up around herself. He had given her a glimpse of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Martha watched the exchange with a soft, knowing smile. "You're stronger than you think, Clara," she said quietly. "You don't have to run anymore. It's time to stand up." Clara took a deep breath, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She felt something shift in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. The first stirrings of defiance. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in 4 years, Clara believed something different. She could escape. She could be free. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll trust you. Just don't let him find me." "I won't," Jack promised. With a final glance at the storage room, Clara grabbed the coat and slipped her hand inside the lining. The key was still there, the weight of it grounding her. It was time. The night air was cold, biting at Clara's exposed skin as she stood just inside the back door of the Silver Dollar Saloon, watching the last of the evening's customers stumble off into the street. The darkness outside seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing up every trace of warmth from the saloon. The flames from the hearth flickered weakly, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. Clara's hands shook as she smoothed her dress. She hadn't expected to leave tonight. She hadn't planned to. The weight of the decision to walk out of her own life, into the unknown, pressed down on her like a leaden blanket. Jack Thornton was waiting just outside. She could feel the pull of his presence even from here. The way he had spoken to her earlier, so steady, so sure, had cracked something open inside her. But still, there was that fear, that ever-present ache in her chest, telling her that no matter what she did, it would never be enough. She could never escape Frank, not really. Her fingers brushed the key hidden inside her father's old coat. The metal was warm, almost as if it had come alive in her grasp. It was the only thing she had left that connected her to a life before Frank, to a father who had loved her, to a world outside the walls of the saloon. And yet it was also a symbol of everything she had lost, everything she was leaving behind. "Clara." Jack's voice cut through the silence, low and commanding, like the whisper of a storm on the horizon. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his gray eyes reflecting the light from the saloon. "You ready?" She took a deep breath, forcing herself to steady her trembling hands. The sound of her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she nodded. "I'm ready." It wasn't a lie, exactly. She was ready to leave. Ready to escape the life Frank had trapped her in. Ready to break free from the chains that had bound her for so long. But what came next? Could she really do this? Could she leave behind the only life she had known? "You've got a long road ahead," Jack said, his voice softening as he stepped forward, offering her a reassuring hand. "But it's a road to freedom, Clara. No one's going to stop us now." Clara hesitated for a moment, looking at his hand like it was a lifeline. His hand was strong, steady. It felt different from Frank's touch. It felt like safety. But would that last? Could it? The sound of footsteps on the porch jolted her from her thoughts. Frank. Her heart dropped to her stomach. She had barely heard him come down the stairs, but now his boots were heavy on the boards of the porch. He was home early, earlier than she'd expected. "I'll go with you," she whispered, more to herself than to Jack. "I'll trust you." "Good," Jack replied. "Then let's go." Before she could take another step, the door slammed open, and Frank's voice echoed through the darkened room. "Clara!" His tone was low, dangerous, a sound that made her spine stiffen. She turned sharply to see him standing in the doorway of the saloon, his eyes wild with a fury she knew all too well. He had been drinking. She could smell it from here. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" Every muscle in Clara's body locked up. The tremor in her hands worsened, and her breath caught in her throat. Her body wanted to freeze, to collapse back into the routine she had so carefully crafted for survival. The routine where she smiled when he told her to smile, where she nodded when he barked orders, where she kept her head down and her mouth shut. The routine that kept her safe, or at least alive. But tonight was different. Clara looked at Jack, who stood just behind her, calm as ever, his eyes focused on Frank. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. "I'm leaving, Frank," she said, her voice steadier than she thought it would be. "I'm done." The words were like a firecracker that had gone off too quickly, and the world seemed to explode around her, Frank's face twisted with rage. He didn't take a step toward her. He didn't have to. His presence alone filled the room, suffocating her, choking her. "You think you're going to leave me?" His voice was a low growl. "You think I'll let you walk away from me, Clara? You belong to me." Clara didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that showing fear only made him worse. That was the game he played, the one where she was always the prey, always the one who would lose. "I'm not yours anymore," Clara said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I'm leaving, and this time I won't let you stop me." For a long, heart-stopping moment, Frank just stared at her as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then he took a slow step forward, his eyes narrowing into cold slits of malice. "You're going to regret this, Clara," he said, his voice like ice. "I promise you that." Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't step back. She stood her ground, her hand tightening around the key hidden inside her coat. Jack stepped forward then, his broad shoulders blocking her from Frank's view. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "You've lost her, Frank," he said quietly, "and you're not going to lay a hand on her again." Frank sneered, his gaze flicking from Jack to Clara and back again. "You think you can protect her, old man? You don't know who you're messing with." Jack didn't flinch. "I'm not going anywhere, Frank," he said, his voice full of quiet resolve. "And neither is she." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. The tension in the room was suffocating, and Clara could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She couldn't let Frank see how much he still scared her, how deeply his words still cut. She couldn't let him know that even now, after everything, part of her still feared him. But she had made a choice, and she wasn't going to back down. Frank's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Clara thought he might lunge at them. Instead, he took a step back, his fists clenching at his sides. "You'll regret this," he repeated, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "You'll both regret this." Clara didn't respond. She didn't need to. She took Jack's hand in hers. and turned toward the door, stepping into the cold night without looking back. And as they stepped into the darkness, leaving the Silver Dollar Saloon and Frank behind, Clara realized something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. It was the first time in a long time that she felt like she could breathe. The cold night air hit Clara's face like a slap, but it didn't sting as it should have. Instead, it felt freeing, like she was stepping into a new world, a world where she wasn't bound by Frank's anger or the saloon's walls. She couldn't remember the last time she had taken a breath that felt so deep, so full of life. Her heart was still racing, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline. But there was something in her chest that was different. Something light. Something almost like peace. Jack's hand, steady and strong, gripped hers tightly, and she clung to it as they made their way through the dark alley behind the saloon. Every step they took felt like a victory, like they were getting closer to the future she dreamed of, far from Frank, far from the life that had suffocated her. "You're safe now," Jack said softly, glancing over at her. His gray eyes were filled with something that looked like understanding, something that made Clara feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. The weight of his gaze made her feel exposed, but not in a bad way. It was like he was telling her it was okay to be who she was, even with all the cracks, the scars, the history that weighed her down. "I don't feel safe yet," Clara admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know what this feels like, what freedom feels like." Jack squeezed her hand. "You will." They reached the back of the small boarding house where Jack had parked the horses. Martha's voice rang out from the dark, her silhouette appearing in the glow of the lantern light. "You two get out, okay?" "We're here," Jack called back, his voice steady, but there was a hint of something else there. He was still on guard, still watching, still aware of the danger that followed them like a shadow. Frank's words echoed in Clara's mind, the promise that she would regret this. The words weren't just threats, they were warnings, ones that made her wonder if she'd ever truly be free of him, if she'd ever stop looking over her shoulder. Martha came forward, her face softening when she saw Clara, her eyes flickering with a sympathy Clara didn't know how to accept. "You did it," Martha said quietly. "You walked out. That's something." "I don't feel like I did much," Clara replied, her throat tight. The reality of what she'd done hadn't sunk in fully yet. It was too soon. It didn't feel real. She'd spent so many years surviving the worst of Frank's cruelty, the coldness of a life she hadn't chosen, that stepping into something else, something better, felt like a dream she might wake up from any second. "You did more than most," Martha said gently, a knowing look on her face. "You walked away from the devil. You gave yourself a chance to start over." Clara nodded, but the words didn't settle in her chest. She wasn't sure she could believe them yet. Not when the fear of what came next gripped her so tightly. She didn't know where she was going, where she would end up, or if Jack's promise of safety and freedom would last. She was too tired of hoping to hope for much anymore. But as she stood in the quiet, cold night with Jack beside her and Martha behind her, something inside her did feel different. Something that made her wonder if this, whatever it was, could be enough. Jack mounted one of the horses without a word, and Clara followed suit. She was stiff, unsure of how to move forward now that she was no longer tethered to the life she had known. She had been waiting for someone else to decide for her, to pull her along, to make the choices for her. But now, with no one else to answer to, she realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. She was in control. Jack looked at her as she settled herself on the horse. "You're gonna be okay, Clara. We'll make it through." "I hope so," she whispered back, trying to find some comfort in his words. He had been there for her when she hadn't even asked, when she was still convinced that there was no way out. But now that they were leaving the only home she had known for the past 4 years, Clara wasn't sure what was waiting for them. The journey ahead felt long. They would have to keep moving, far from Redstone, far from Frank, and that meant running again, which Clara had vowed never to do. But this time, there was a difference. This time, she wasn't running from something. She was running toward something. Something new. Something free. They rode in silence. The night wrapped around them like a thick blanket. Clara focused on the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses, hooves on the dirt road beneath them. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to look back. Every time she glanced over her shoulder, the haunting image of Frank's eyes burned in her mind. She didn't want to see him again. She didn't want him in her thoughts, in her life. The night passed in quiet, with only the occasional whisper of wind through the trees to break the stillness. Jack kept an easy pace, his focus never wavering as he led them toward the next town. They'd have to stop for supplies soon, but there was no rush. The road ahead was long, and they had time. But Clara wasn't sure how much time she had before the fear inside her, deep and raw, would be too much to handle. As the hours passed and the night stretched on, Clara began to feel the weight of exhaustion settle into her bones. Her body ached from the tension of leaving everything behind. There was still so much to worry about, so much to fear. She didn't know how to feel free, how to stop feeling like she was still running, still hiding. Jack glanced back at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You okay back there?" Clara nodded, her voice thick with the emotions she didn't know how to name. "Yeah, just trying to get used to it." He gave a small, understanding smile. "You'll get there." Clara didn't say anything. She wasn't sure if she believed him. It was easy to say she'd be fine. But nothing in her life had been easy. As they rode through the darkness, Clara let the sound of Jack's steady breathing, the horses, hooves, and the stillness of the night fill her mind. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about the next beating, the next threat. She wasn't planning her survival anymore. She wasn't planning anything at all. She was just being, and that, for now, was enough. The sun had barely started to peek over the horizon when Clara awoke, the sound of birds fluttering in the trees and the crackle of a campfire greeting her from the edge of her dreams. She could feel the cool bite of the morning air against her skin, but the warmth of the fire and the comforting weight of Jack's coat wrapped around her shoulders was enough to draw her into a sense of quiet peace, at least for the moment. She shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the still sleeping Jack beside her. He had stayed up most of the night keeping watch, never once complaining, always alert, always focused. His loyalty, his unwavering protection, had been a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed until now. But this morning, after everything they'd left behind, after the first steps of her escape, she felt the smallest flicker of hope, the kind that, while fragile, began to grow stronger with every passing moment. Clara stood and stretched, her muscles protesting as she moved. The ache in her body was a reminder of the long journey they'd started, and though it wasn't comfortable, it felt real. She was alive, free, and she wasn't going back. She walked a few paces away from their camp, her boots crunching softly on the dried earth as the quiet of the morning surrounded her. Everything felt different now. The air, the earth, the sky, all of it felt wide open. There was room to breathe, room to think, room to be. The sound of hooves in the distance broke her moment of solitude, and her heart skipped a beat. She turned sharply, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that was tucked into her coat. Her breath quickened, but she forced herself to stay still, to hold on to the calm she had fought so hard to find. Jack had warned her there would be no easy road ahead. There was no guarantee of safety in this new life. The horse galloped closer, and Clara's mind raced through every possible scenario. Who would be coming after them? Frank's men? Or worse, the sheriff? But when the rider came into view, her heart settled, and the tension in her chest eased. It was Martha. "Morning," Martha greeted, her breath visible in the cool air as she reined her horse to a stop. "How are you holding up?" "Better," Clara answered, her voice steady, though there was a slight edge to it. She still wasn't entirely sure she could believe everything that had happened in the last 24 hours, that she had really left Frank behind, left him in the dust. "Jack still sleeping?" Martha nodded. "He is, but I didn't want to wake him just yet. Figured you might need someone to talk to." Clara smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. She hadn't realized just how much she'd been holding in until Martha had arrived. The weight of everything was still there, pressing down on her chest, reminding her that they weren't out of the woods yet. But somehow, with Martha's presence, a little bit of the fear lessened. "How's he really doing?" Clara asked, her voice soft, full of concern. "You said he was pushing himself too much. He didn't look like he was healing right when we stopped last night." Martha's expression grew more serious. "Jack's stubborn, Clara. You know that. But I'm worried. He's not giving himself the rest he needs. And while I know he's doing this for you because he cares about you, I don't think he knows how much more dangerous pushing himself could be." Clara nodded, feeling a deep pang in her chest at the thought. Jack had already been through so much for her. For a moment, she felt the guilt creeping back in, that awful feeling of being a burden. She didn't want to be that. Not anymore. Not for him. Not for anyone. "Do you think he'll be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Martha's eyes softened as she gazed at Clara, a mixture of empathy and understanding there. "He will be, Clara. But you need to help him understand that it's okay to rest, to take it slow. You can't keep running on empty, and neither can he. I know you're both scared, but now you've got each other, and that's something worth holding on to." Clara didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at the ground, watching as the dirt and dust settled under her boots. She wasn't sure how to let herself lean on anyone, let alone Jack. For so long, she had carried the weight of her life on her shoulders. The fear, the pain, the constant weight of survival. It had all been hers to manage, hers to hide. But now things were different. Now she wasn't alone anymore. And as much as it terrified her to trust someone else with her life, with her heart, there was a part of her, small and fragile, that wanted to believe that maybe she could lean on someone, that maybe Jack could be the one to hold her up like he'd been holding her together all along. The sound of Jack's voice broke her from her thoughts. "I hear talking," he called out, his voice hoarse but warm. "Are you gossiping about me already?" Clara smiled softly and turned toward him. He was standing at the campfire, wiping his face with the back of his hand, looking better than he had the night before. He'd clearly been up for a while, probably trying to hide the fact that he was still in pain, but his eyes still held that same determination, that same resolve. "I was just telling Martha how much trouble you're causing me already," Clara teased lightly. Jack raised an eyebrow, a smile pulling at the corners of his lips despite the exhaustion in his face. "I'm trying to heal here. Some of us don't get the luxury of sitting around while others do all the work." Clara laughed softly, a sound that felt strange and unfamiliar, but also right. She liked the way Jack made her feel, like she could still laugh, like she could still live without fear of what would come next. "Maybe you're right," she said, stepping toward him. "Maybe I should be the one doing the work now. You need rest, remember?" He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he reached for her hand, pulling her gently toward him. "You're already doing the hardest work, Clara," he said quietly. "And I'll rest when I'm sure you're safe." Her heart fluttered at his words. It wasn't the first time he had said something like that, but it still felt like a promise. A promise that, for once, someone else was looking out for her. It was strange and comforting, and everything she had longed for in the darkest parts of herself. "We'll be okay," she whispered, almost to herself. She didn't know if it was a lie or the truth, but she needed to believe it. Jack's hand tightened around hers, and he pulled her closer. "Together," he said, his voice low and steady. "We'll make it through this. Together." Clara nodded, her chest tightening with a surge of emotion she didn't quite know how to handle. But for the first time in so long, it felt like hope, not fear, was taking root in her heart. And maybe that was enough. For now, it had to be. The morning after their quiet conversation was brighter than any Clara had seen in years. The sun's warmth spread across the desert floor, bathing the land in a soft golden glow. Everything felt new, even the familiar land beneath her boots. The vastness of the open sky above, the wind in the distance, the promise of the horizon, it all felt like a world waiting to be explored. But there was a weight to this day, too. The road ahead wasn't just about freedom. It was about facing what they were both leaving behind. Jack was still nursing his wounds, but that didn't stop him from pushing himself forward. She saw him try to hide the pain as he adjusted his saddle, trying to act like the man he was before the bullet, before the blood. Clara noticed how he moved with purpose, as if the world depended on his every step. It was the same determination she had seen in him since the night she met him, a man who had lost so much, yet continued on. But this time, something was different. He wasn't running. Neither of them was. Ready? Jack's voice was steady, though the strain in his eyes didn't escape her. Clara met his gaze, and for the first time her heart didn't skip with fear. Instead, it beat with something she hadn't felt in years, certainty. "I'm ready," she replied. They rode for hours that day, the miles slipping by in a blur. The land around them rolled from jagged hills to endless plains, the dry earth cracking beneath their horses' hooves. It felt like the world was empty. Just the wind, the sound of their breath, and the quiet hum of distant mountains. The kind of quiet that made Clara feel like she could finally hear herself think. But the quiet was interrupted as they neared a small town, dust rising from the road as they approached. Jack had been quiet for most of the ride, lost in his thoughts, but now he seemed to brace himself, as if anticipating something. Clara's fingers tightened around the reins. She didn't know if it was just the heat or if something was coming, but her heart began to pound in her chest again. "What's wrong?" Clara asked softly, her eyes scanning the horizon. Jack's gaze flicked to her, and for a moment his gray eyes softened. "It's not you. It's just, this is the hard part." Clara frowned, the weight of his words pressing against her ribs. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at the town that was quickly growing larger in the distance. She could see a handful of people moving about in the street, a horse-drawn wagon turning the corner. It looked like a normal town, too normal. "We're not safe yet," Jack said finally, his voice low and careful. "Not until Frank is behind bars. Not until the law, real law, gets a hold of him." Clara understood what he meant. They were still running from Frank, still running from the consequences of everything he'd done. But she also realized something she hadn't fully admitted to herself before. It didn't matter anymore. Her eyes followed Jack's gaze toward the small town. There were people here. People who didn't know her past. People who could give her a chance to start over, a real chance. She wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. She wasn't anyone's property. She was free. "We can do this," she whispered, mostly to herself. Jack gave her a small smile. A smile that was both tired and hopeful. "We will. We have to." The horses slowed as they entered the town, the dust from the dry ground settling around them. Clara noticed how the air shifted as they passed the general store, the saloon, the few small shops that lined the street. People gave them curious glances but said nothing. She wasn't sure if they were being watched or if they were just another passerby in this quiet desert town. Either way, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that they had made it this far. Clara couldn't help but feel the tension in her shoulders ease slightly as they rode through the center of town. She had no idea where they were going or what would happen next, but for the first time, she felt the pulse of hope beat louder than her fear. They had come so far. And this was just the beginning. They stopped in front of a small boarding house at the end of the street. The building was old, with a faded sign hanging above the door, but it felt like the right place to rest. Jack dismounted slowly, his face pale but determined. He was holding it together for now, but Clara knew he needed rest. "We'll stay here tonight," Jack said, giving her a weary look. "Get some food, some sleep. We'll talk about the next step tomorrow." Clara nodded, her heart still a little unsure, but she trusted him. She had to. As she helped Jack with his gear, she caught a glimpse of the town's sheriff in the distance, talking to a couple of townsfolk near the post office. She froze for a second, her breath catching in her throat. "Clara?" Jack's voice cut through her panic. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though she felt a flash of panic rise inside her. Before she could finish her sentence, Jack's hand rested on her arm, his grip gentle but firm. "It's okay, we're not running anymore. Frank can't hurt us here. Not like he did back there." Clara swallowed, trying to calm her racing heart. She didn't know if she could trust that, but she trusted Jack. She always had. "Let's go inside," he said, his voice low, but his eyes filled with something that made her believe it. The door to the boarding house opened, and the warm smell of bread and stew drifted toward them. Clara stepped inside, feeling the heat of the fire on her face, and closed the door behind them. The world outside felt distant, like a memory she was slowly leaving behind. Jack followed her inside, his steps slower than usual. He wasn't healed, but he was here. They were here. Clara's heart felt full, even if she didn't have all the answers. But with every step, she knew one thing for sure. She was never going back. She had chosen this life, chosen Jack, and there was no turning back now. She wasn't running. She was living. As they settled into the quiet of the room, Jack leaned back in a chair by the window, his eyes scanning the landscape beyond. Clara sat at the small table, staring at the fire as it flickered in the hearth. The world outside might have been uncertain, but inside, with Jack at her side, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. She was home. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that tomorrow might just be a little better. "Jack," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Yeah?" he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." He looked at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Together?" Clara nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "Together," quote. And for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to believe in the future. She wasn't sure what it would bring, but with Jack beside her, she knew she could face it. They had survived. Together. And now they would live.